Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Catherine Robinson. I'm Head of Campaigns and Communications for Natural Justice. Welcome to this fantastic space on the final day of the African People's Counter COP. This session is called Resisting False Solutions and Safeguarding the Right to Land, FPIC, to Advance Climate Justice and Biodiversity Protection. We do have interpretation available for our French speakers. If you just click on the world icon at the bottom right-hand of your screen and pick your preferred language. We are amplifying this conversation on social media. It's being live streamed on Natural Justice's Facebook page and ESCR-Net's YouTube channel. We are also doing some live tweeting on our Twitter page at Natural Justice. So please do join in the conversation and amplify this conversation. The chat is open, so please feel welcome to introduce yourselves on the chat. Let us know where you're coming from and where you're observing from, and we will have a Q&A session later on in this webinar. So do put your questions and points that you'd like us to think through and discuss in the Q&A. I'd just like to say a special thank you to our co-conveners and our sponsoring organizations. This is co-convened by the International Network for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, ESCR-Net, the African Civil Society Biodiversity Alliance, and of course, Natural Justice. And we're doing this in partnership with the conveners of the African People's Counter COP, the African Climate Justice Collective. Please do follow us all on social media and amplify this conversation. Our handles are at African CJ Group for the African Climate Justice Collective, for CSO's African, that's ACBA, at ESCR-Net and at Natural Justice. And do join us in celebrating this Pan-African and global South space. The African People's Counter COP, there is a declaration available for signature, which is going to the African Union and African states. So please do sign and amplify that declaration. With that, just a warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm going to hand over to my co-facilitator, Joey from ESCR-Net.
Hi, everyone. Very glad to be here. I'm Joey Chowdhury. I coordinate the climate and environmental justice work at ESCR-Net, the International Network for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And today we've come together to reflect and discuss on this topic, resisting false solutions, safeguarding the right to land and free, prior and informed consent to advance climate justice and biodiversity protection. In terms of the structure of this session, we will start with a bit of context setting, and then we will have a discussion with our panelists, after which we will open the floor to the audience for questions. We are very honored to have with us today speakers working at the very heart of these intersecting crises who bring deep knowledge and experience. We have with us today Christine Candy, who is the Executive Director of the Endorois Indigenous Women Empowerment Network, IWIN. She has over 10 years of experience advocating for the rights of her community at a local, traditional, regional, and international level. Delme Cupido is the Natural Justice Director of Southern Africa. He has joined Natural Justice as the Hub Director for the Southern Africa team in June 2021. He has more than 18 years experience in the advancement of human rights and governance in Southern Africa. As a human rights and public interest lawyer and activist, he has a deep commitment to the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities who face the brunt of the onslaught against nature and the environments that sustain them. We have Glory Luong from FIAN International, whose work focuses on issues of access to and control over natural resources. She is keen on participatory community engagement for bottom-up accountability with emphasis on gender and intersectional vulnerabilities. By training, she is a rural sociologist with a PhD in development sociology and postgraduate diplomas in gender policy and planning. Radiatu Kanple is from Liberia. She is a policy advisor at the Natural Resource Women Platform, working with women leadership on rights to land and natural resources. An important factor of the Natural Resource Women Platform's work is amplifying the voices of women, the most marginalized women, documenting their challenges together and finding possible solutions to these problems through policy recommendations. We will very briefly now do some context setting, and then we're going to move to our discussion with these amazing panelists. So at the moment, as we all know, we're living through intersecting and devastating crises at a truly unprecedented scale, including the climate and biodiversity crises. As science tells us, these two crises are closely interconnected, and there is no possibility of transformative solutions if these environmental emergencies are addressed in isolation. And yet they tend to be addressed in silos in the multilateral spheres. These spaces, the international spaces, climate is addressed under the UN Climate Agency, the UNFCCC space. So we know that COP27, the intergovernmental negotiations on climate, is coming up in a few weeks. Biodiversity is largely addressed under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity space. And we have the intergovernmental talks on biodiversity at COP15 coming up this December. And at COP15, there is a very critical agreement being negotiated, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which has several important provisions, of which the 30-30 target, the conservation of at least 30% globally of land areas and of sea areas, is of particular significance from a land rights perspective, since it does not yet definitively integrate the protection of indigenous peoples and local communities' land rights and other related human rights. This is of concern because we have seen protected areas lead to land rights violations, very grave land rights violations in the past. The spaces where solutions to address the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis are discussed. These may differ, but it is a cross-cutting reality that these crises, their structural drivers, and even certain solutions, or rather false solutions, for example, fortress conservation or nature-based solutions, can seriously impact indigenous peoples and local communities' human and environmental rights, especially rights to land, free, prior, and informed consent, and self-determination. Fortress conservation, just to go a little bit deeper into what false solutions look like. Fortress conservation, the creation of protected areas separating people from ecosystems to protect biodiversity, is a fundamentally false construct, and one that violently evicts indigenous peoples and local communities from their land and livelihoods, the very best custodians of biodiversity. Nature-based solutions may sound promising, but has played out in practice as a false solution, both on the climate and biodiversity side, and can include forms of offsetting, basically ways to compensate for environmental harm or carbon emissions, including, for example, through large-scale tree planting. Finding land for such offsets has led to massive land grabs, and it is estimated that this will only increase over time. So what do we mean by the term false solutions? Essentially solutions, and this is just one way of looking at it, right? But essentially solutions which do not address the root causes of climate change or biodiversity loss, but rather worsen or risk worsening the crisis it's meant to address. Such solutions distract from real solutions, like drastically reducing emissions at source. Such false solutions do not necessarily lead to emission reductions or biodiversity protection, as data shows us. And such false solutions can result in serious human rights violations. Such measures are often enabled by corporate capture, the widespread phenomenon of powerful corporations exerting undue influence over government decision-making processes that impact public interest and fundamental rights. Pay careful attention to how enthusiastic companies like Shell, like Total, are about certain solutions that are considered false solutions, such as nature-based solutions. And then our decision-making spaces are often largely captured by corporate interests, by elite interests. Consider that last year, more than 500 fossil fuel lobbyists attended the climate negotiations. Let's take a step back and consider the immeasurable social and cultural value of land for humanity. In indigenous peoples, tribal peoples, peasants, and other land-dependent local communities play an outsized role in conserving biodiversity and combating climate change. Recognizing and enforcing their right to land and tenure rights is in any case a human rights imperative, and it is also in line with the latest science, a key scalable solution to the climate and biodiversity crises. And yet, despite this being true, rather than protecting land rights and the rights of indigenous peoples, we see measures taken in the name of confronting the climate and biodiversity crises, leading to land grabs, to militarization of territories, preserving the interests of elite and upholding systems of oppression, while people are dispossessed and our planet burns. And in all of this, we must hold close in our hearts this reality that land defenders are being violently targeted, outright murdered. According to Global Witness, more than 1,700 land and environmental defenders were killed in the last decade, and this is likely an undercount. This should be self-evident that solutions to the climate and biodiversity crises must not violate human rights. At COP27 and at COP15, both fast approaching, it will be important to align advocacy, resist false solutions, and call for parties to adopt a human rights-based approach, including in relation to the right to land. So that was a little bit of context setting. And with this background, we will now turn to our esteemed panelists. So I would like to, we want to focus on the question of what are examples of false solutions to the climate and biodiversity crises that community leaders are seeing in their work, and how are these affecting the right to land, and how are communities fighting back? So Radiatu, if I could turn it to you, what would you want to share on false solutions? And what does this mean for land rights? Thank you, Radiatu. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Joey. Firstly, I want to say that when we talk about false solution, like Joey has said, it is those solutions that do not address the causes of climate and biodiversity crisis, but that have the potential to worsen the crisis. So concerning climate and biodiversity crisis, it has actually been very extremely serious, especially on the continent of Africa. So in the face of this crisis, we have been given like a host of solutions that we refer to as false solutions, because they rather deepen already existing crises and even create new problems. So these solutions are actually like constructed, discussed, and implemented without communities and that of indigenous people. So through our experience at the Natural Resource Owner Platform, we have seen that in almost every case that these solutions do not really solve anything, but rather create problems. So none of these solutions address the causes of this crisis, but they rather reinforce and dominate economic systems. So I will go for the first false solution that we've experienced in Liberia. So it's actually the establishment of protected areas in Liberia. So it is normal to hear our government say that the establishment of protected areas is to be able to protect and reserve Liberia's unique biodiversity. So I can take you as far back as 1983, when the first protected area, which is the Sabo National Park, was designated. So that park was followed by the East Nima Reserve, which was in 2003, and then the Lake Piso Multi-Sustainable Use Reserve, which was in 2011. But come to see this, here's the problem. Imagine since 1983, the current model in establishing protected areas in Liberia has not been sustainable. Conservation in Liberia has not fully and meaningfully consulted and engaged local communities as assets and stakeholders. And we all know that forest dwellers are knowledgeable about land stewardship and practices, and are able to serve as early warning detectors and frontline responders. But because these communities and indigenous people are not involved in the model approaching conservation in Liberia, this has actually created tension, leading to open clashes between our government through the Forestry Development Authority and that of affected communities who have claimed that the same protected areas being established are their ancestral land. So if we talk about the park that was designated in 1983, which is the Sapo National Park, honestly, that park has been transformed into mining and poaching enclave, only because communities were not involved, they are not consulted. So without involving communities to obtain their consent, what our government in Liberia is doing is indistinguishable from land grab, and as well as have already seen, like we've seen in the last decade, that it will continue to escalate land-based violence in our country. So for me, I think it is time to bring protected areas management home and back to Liberians and in the hands of Liberia. We need to move beyond this colonial and imperialist model we have. So the next aspect of this has to do with the industrial tree plantation, which is normally referred to as the afforestation and reforestation. So we've seen that for the past decade in Liberia, we have witnessed massive land grab across our 15 counties in Liberia by corporations who are industrial tree plantations. And mostly these trees that are planted are toxic trees that are fast growing, like rubber, like oil palm, and they are all destined for industrial processes. So all of the areas where these plantations are set up, local people severely are impacted from the negative of these plantations. So the social and environmental justice conflicts that result from these negative impacts of plantation are mainly about land, access, and tenure, but also there are others. So for example, the social, economic, environmental, and cultural impacts, human rights violations are very common among others. But in spite of the heavy negative impact of these industrial tree plantation, they continue to be actively promoted as these carbon sinks, or the supply energy and electricity through these biofuels and burning wood that is especially destined and for wood-based power facilities like places like in Europe. So meanwhile, local communities in Liberia face the challenge to continue to build a stronger and broader movement to halt the continuous land grabbing for industrial tree plantation. So I just mentioned the issue of biofuel, and like the next first solution that comes to mind is the issue of biomass for energy generation. So I remember as far back as 2006 in Liberia, we had this company referred to as the Buchanan Renewable Company that was established so that they are able to produce wood chips for electricity back in our country. So that was just around the time where Liberia was recovering from its very devastating civil war. And when we knew that there was this new energy strategy based on the use of biomass as an important energy source that had been developed in Europe. So while the company actively promoted its business model of producing biomass from all unproductive rubber trees as sustainable one, it was also very seen that these smallholder farmers were not benefiting as much as they had expected. So the activities, the Buchanan renewable activities, were actually to produce biomass from these old rubber trees, which is sourced from both the smallholders, rubber farmers, and that of the large plantations. And then they will construct a biomass fuel power plant that will help supply the capital city of Liberia, Monrovia, with electricity. And then the company actually agreed to clear the old rubber trees and then do replanting of new seedlings and provide maintenance for the first 7 years. But I can tell you today that one, not a plant of biomass fuel was actually built in Liberia, and that all of those rubber trees that were chipped were all shipped to Europe, leaving these communities vulnerable, leaving these farmers with nothing left. They had a clear land, they had nothing, their livelihood were cut off. And like there are a series of reports we've written. We've written reports that talk about their operations. So for example, we wrote a report called in the burning rubber. And then we also did a report called cut and run, because that was what they actually did. They cut these rubber trees and produced, and they never lived up to their promises. So, but again, this is a false solution, because growing biomass will require an estimated 3 billion hectares, which is actually twice the Earth's currently cultivated land. So any attempt to implement this false solution will actually thus be impossible without the mass deforestation and soil degradation. And obviously, land grabs will be guaranteed because they need land to continue that. So moreover, we see that agricultural land was transformed to be able to produce these biomass products. When that happens, we'll see that food prices could rise, fueling hunger and malnutrition could be a factor, and that at the end of the day, the destruction of vital ecosystems will eliminate this livelihood of local communities and indigenous people. That's why we are referring to these solutions as false solutions, because they have not been able to address the root cause of the climate and biodiversity crisis that local communities and indigenous people continue to suffer. So this false solution actually ignores and harms community rights, including those indigenous people, degrades the ecosystems, and continues to threaten the biodiversity and climate crisis that we already face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Radiatu, for that very powerful intervention. And I am sure we will have questions for you, but I will circle now to Christine. Christine, from your experience as an Endorois leader, could you speak briefly to the land struggle of the Endorois peoples and what this struggle for land rights means as the climate and biodiversity crisis intensifies worldwide, but we are also seeing huge impacts in Kenya? Thanks, Christine. And just a reminder also that there will be other opportunities also to come in. So yeah, just to keep that in mind. Thank you very much, Christine. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joy, for giving me this opportunity to share my experience being a human rights defender and activist from an indigenous community, and again being a person with disabilities who has stood on the line with other community leaders to fight for my community rights. For your information, I'm Christine Kandie. I'm from Africa as a region. I'm from Kenya, Rift Valley, Baringo County, Lake Bogoria region area. So I come from an indigenous community called Endorois community, and we live around Bogoria landscape, and as a community we have a strong attachment to the land, and this land means a lot to us because for a number of years, for like 50 years, we've been looking for our collective rights, just because we were evicted from our ancestral land way back in 1970. 3, to create room for conservation and other tourism reasons from the Kenyan government. Our land was declared as one of the protected areas, and this resulted from denying us to access and use it for our traditional reasons. As an indigenous community, there was a close relationship with the land in a way that if we could provide some healing at some point, because we know there are some high and low levels in life, and at times when there is a lot of issues going on, because in Lake Bogoria is one of salty water lake, and there is a way that at some point it emute a bad adder at some point, and we could do a traditional rituals to put that one away. So for a long time, we took our collective rights at the local level, and after we were defeated, we took it to African Commission, and then again we took it to international space. We had a ruling in this in regards to this one, and it was served to us 10 years ago, and government of Kenya were required to give us back our land to proactively develop because it was our right. But nevertheless, this has never come back to us, and we are still negotiating for it, and we have nothing coming out of this struggle. As I speak in regards to false solution, is that we regard that one as a false solution, because when we denied this land, the government intended to have it, or were required to protect it for conservation and other wildlife reasons. You realize that there is a decline use of the land, because one, the wildlife which are in Bogoria started declining it. Right now, as I speak, there is a rising water levels that has swallowed around 20 kilometers square of the land that was inhabited by our community. So this one means that there is a lot of damages coming out of this one. There is the issues of productivity of the soil declining, and again, as indigenous community, we are facing a consequences of climate effects that we have little knowledge of who caused it. We have tried to do our mitigation mechanism, but over time, we have a lot of issues to face. And then again, there is a lot of issues in regards to conflict that has started coming out. We have there is a lot of killings going out in our land because of the issues of cattle rustling, fighting from one community to another. We feel that government is running a proxy wars, using our neighbors to evict us from our ancestral land. And again, we have the challenges of, now the impacts of climate change is that it goes deeper to most vulnerable in the society, in the fact that these people will miss decision-making spaces. Some of us, being a human rights defender, environmental activists, face a lot of arrest and limitation from the government because we speak about the issues that are affecting the community. We bring out those climate-related challenges that we felt that it needs to be addressed. So this one become a challenge, and in regards to this one, myself with other women, we came up with the Indonesian Indigenous Women Empowerment Network. That is a community-based organization that advocates for the rights of women and persons with disabilities. And again, realizing that the community goes through a lot of issues and a lot of challenges and catastrophic disasters being felt, and nobody talks about it. We talk a proactive space to try to speak about such issues, document, and even try to encourage women to take leadership spaces. So those are the key issues coming from a very conservative community, and trying to speak out our issues, go through a lot of challenges. We have the impacts of climate change. We have a lot of issues going on. We have the Endorse case that has never been implemented. And all this we were doing for the betterment of our community, because we believe that being an indigenous community, we relate with the land just like a child in our mother's womb, that uses umbilical cord for food and survival. So when the land is taken away from us, we are being exposed to a lot of issues, to a lot of health-related issues. We are faced with the consequences of climate change. The government does not take proactive role in providing solution. And we felt that this is a false solution because it does not get into the root cause. If it was going to the root cause of the issues, they could have gone back to the history and get to us our land back and even try to solve our issues from that level. So I appreciate for this opportunity to speak, and I look forward to other questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, for that very rich and insightful intervention. And all that you and Radiatu do on the front lines is incredible. Thank you very much. I will move to Glory now. And Glory, we would want to ask you another question. The false solutions, as Radiatu and Christine have underlined, are doing nothing, as we know, to address the root causes of our climate and biodiversity crises. Communities and scientists have been clear about the importance of land rights in and of themselves, and also their importance for carbon mitigation and biodiversity protection. Why is it then that instead climate and biodiversity solutions are leading to massive land grabs and evictions of indigenous peoples and local communities? This disconnect between the absolute need to secure land rights as a solution to the climate and biodiversity crises, and yet we see the exact opposite happening. What do you see as the bigger political and economic forces, the structural issues driving this disconnect? Thanks, Glory. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Joy, for giving me the floor and for giving me the opportunity to reflect on these really burning issues that unfortunately perpetuate marginalization, maintaining colonial structures, and also the capitalist structures. You know, we assume that these solutions come to remedy the problems. No, I think that we are starting anyway from on a maybe wrong basis or foundations, because all the discussions and the rest are not designed to solve the structural problems. You see, it is rather meant to maintain the status quo, to keep profits in the pockets of the capitalists, and also to maintain the dispossessed class. This is my assessment of things, you know. So if we were to have things right, one of the possible ways, because we never have absolute knowledge, you know. So I would say human rights based governance of land, fisheries, forests, and the associated natural resources is impossible. I repeat, impossible without addressing the structural drivers of exclusion, dispossession, and inequality. Currently, what is happening is merely an expansion of rock capitalism, I would say, through the relentless financialization of land, territories, and nature to create assets for speculation on capital markets. That's what is basically happening, and negotiators and corporate-driven bodies are coming onto this. I just want to add a quick example to show what is happening, for example, in other parts of Africa, for example. In 2013, for example, FIAN, the organization I work for, and TNI and other organizations, through one documentary filmmaker, Jove Agbon, documented, for example, the impact of tree plantations in the community of Likol in Mozambique, where a company called Chikweti Forest of Nyasa set up large tree plantations. And this, when you see how this is said, you would understand why I argue that it is to maintain the status quo and to expand, you know, speculation for capital markets. So this company of tree plantations is a subsidiary of the Global Solidarity Forest Fund, a Swedish-based investment fund co-owned by Dutch pension funds, the Diocese of Vasteras, Sweden, and the Norwegian Church Endowment Fund. You see, so you see the network of financing this, and this is why we are talking about trees. We are talking about greenwashing, because this is how I would put it. Of course, it would be discussed as a solution of maybe offsetting, but this is more or less strengthening capitalism, capitalist structure. And to maintain this, you see, they tend to put forward what we just discussed, the 4 solutions to climate change, biodiversity loss, and eco-destruction, which serve supposedly the purposes of green and blue capitalisms. That's what I would maybe put here. So in my view, I would think that to guarantee the right to land is fundamental in the transformation towards sustainable, healthy, and just social and economic models. And achieving this requires scaling up bottom-up, people-centered models that have been proven. Our colleagues have just shared what they are doing and what their communities did in the past to maintain these forests that are now being mapped out and secluded in the name of conservation. These communities preserve this. So at the moment, I would say that the transition to just and sustainable social and economic models require the control of people and communities over their lands, fisheries, forests, and territories. And to achieve this, all states, as well as the UN systems, in the process of policy and lawmaking, need, for example, to respect, protect, and guarantee all tenure rights. I repeat, all tenure rights for peasants, small-scale fishers, pastoralists, forest dwellers, as well as indigenous people, whether these tenure rights are officially registered or not, including their collective and or customary tenure systems, as well as fishing usage in the transit rights, among others. This also applies to all policies, programs, and activities with foreseeable impact on other countries, such as development, cooperation, investment, and trade, referring to the example in Mozambique that I just highlighted. This also requires states and the UN, the entire UN system, to guarantee the recognition, protection, and restitution of indigenous peoples' territories, as well as reparations to peoples, groups, individuals, and communities who have been arbitrarily dispossessed of their lands, fisheries, and forests due to these kinds of plantations and programs that seek to maintain, capital markets. And there's just a greenwashing of things going on. And we would have a lot of energy going into this. Furthermore, there is need for the states and these UN systems and the red and possibly communities, because communities need to be part of the whole discussion. In discussions that states and the UN adopt measures that guarantee the enjoyment of the rights to land and natural resources by women. Our 2 first speakers have been women fighting for their community and collective rights. They have been youths, and we also have cases of persons living with disabilities, such that these structural discriminations that they suffer should be taken off the discussion table, and that they should have avenues for informed participation. I repeat, informed participation. It's not about spotting a few people from the communities who might not be aware or who are allies of the status quo to participate in discussions. No, we are talking about getting communities and or customary authorities and give them priorities in public policy discussions and negotiations for the legal protection of tenure rights, as well as restitution and redistribution of land where that is applicable. And there is need also to end the global latifuna control by corporations and financial actors, banks, investment funds, pension funds, asset management, and just to name a few, and to promote a just and sustainable redistribution of land and natural resources through public policy or policies of redistributive agrarian reforms where applicable, as well as the expropriation of land that does not fulfill its social function, and or whose use violates human rights or causes environmental destruction. But above all, there is need to put in place effective measures to prevent further dispossessions. Dispossessions have already happened, but there is need that in ongoing discussions and policy formulations debate, there should be measures to prevent further dispossessions through resource grabs and the financialization of nature through carbon markets, offsetting schemes, and under labels such as nature-based solutions, sustainable growth of finance, green/blue economy, and the rest. Basically, if these effective measures are not put in place, then we fall prey to the so-called voluntary safeguards that are just thrown outside there as a panorama without any measures of effective enforcement, and these are set by these corporate capitalists who seek to maintain the status quo. These maybe are my early reflections, but I'm open to discussions further, and I think we can have more to debate around. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Glory, for that very potent and much needed analysis. I have to say, I'm very inspired and very moved by the interventions from you and Christine and Radia too. Thank you very much. And I agree, I think there will be questions and discussions going forward. But I want to move us into our next question. And Delme, I'm giving you a heads up that I will be calling on you first, but we hope that all of the panelists can come in on this last question to the panelists. Given the overwhelming prevalence of false solutions that we've just discussed and the extent of corporate capture, what are concrete ways in which resisting communities are fighting back to demand their rights to land and effectively address the twin biodiversity and climate crises? What are key ways forward to ensure biodiversity protection and climate justice, particularly in the context of land, of the right to land? So, and key ways forward at COP27 and COP15, but also far beyond. So yes, Delme, your reflections on key ways forward. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And just to say, thanks for having us here. It's been really inspiring listening to the other panelists. And I mean, I think that there's possibly not that much to add to the kind of incisive analysis and reflections that we've heard. But in terms of how communities, certainly in Southern Africa, are kind of fighting back against, all of these land grabs and the violations of their rights. I mean, one of the key strategies that we at Natural Justice use is actually litigation, and is challenging corporations in our courts, because we still actually do have a functioning court system. But the key there is that litigation is community led, as all solutions to this crisis have to be, as has been pointed out. And so communities are organizing themselves and are making connections with other social movements. And I think that's really, in terms of a theory of change, I guess, is I think how things shift. I think is when communities organize themselves and make those connections with other struggles, economics and social justice struggles that are happening in the country, and globally and across the continent. Because the forces that are arrayed against communities, are really massive. And for one small community to take on a large multinational like Shell is extremely difficult because of the resources required and so on. So one key strategy is building solidarity between, whether it's fisher folk working together with communities that are worried about mining on their lands and so on. So I think that, that's one of the kind of key strategies that communities are using. And then I guess the other key strategy, which goes hand in hand with that, is is actually to provide, to legal empowerment for communities, because communities ultimately are at the forefront and on the front line of defending their lands and defending their territories and defending, the ecosystems and biodiversity. And I think we've seen in our region, particularly, that, the bottom line is that communities are facing a number of challenges in our region, economic challenges, energy poverty, and then on top of that, there are all these kind of land grabs that are happening. And so what we've seen here is really that we're witnessing kind of a second scramble for Africa and for our resources. And for an organization like ours or individual organizations, to face this onslaught without communities being at the front line is really impossible, because there are just so many. We recently won a court case against Shell, who were wanting to do seismic testing, offshore seismic testing in South Africa. But as soon as we saw that one off, another one popped up, and there's still 400 and odd other, licenses that have been granted, and every day government is granting more of these licenses. And so really what we kind of need to do is to build a large and a mass social movement, similar to the kinds of social movements that defeated apartheid in South Africa, and that took on pharmaceutical industries when at the height of the HIV crisis. And that's just by way of saying that as it's sort of impossible as it might seem, and as daunting as it might seem to take on these corporate interests, in the first place, we have no choice. We simply have to do it. And in the second place, it can be done, but it does require, communities mobilizing and building that kind of solidarity across social movements to do that. So, yeah, let me leave it there and let the other panelists come in.
Thank you very much, Delme. And also, I think this point on intersecting crises, that climate and biodiversity crises are absolutely existential, but in our lands and in our countries, we see many existential crises, and absolutely on the need to build mass movements. So I'm going to turn it to the incredible organizers and the community mobilizers on the panel. Christine, Radiatu, Glory, any final reflections on what you see? We know what the problems are very well. What do you see as leaders on the front line as key ways forward? What do you see as the needs that we need to meet, the solutions and the strategies going forward? So I'll give the floor to Radiatu. Very briefly, Radiatu, if you have final reflections on key ways forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joey. So, yeah, so before I talk about the key ways forward, I just wanted to mention some of the way communities are resisting, and like just building on from where Delma spoke. So, for example, he spoke about litigation, which is one of the strategies we've actually used in our work in Liberia. And I can tell you that for the past 15 years, we have been collecting evidences, documenting issues around the Salala Rubber Corporation, which is a Sukfin-based corporation. And like a few weeks ago, we finally filed a complaint against the company and that of the government, which I think is very good for these communities, because like over these years, these communities have stood up, organized themselves. They were willing to learn, where we provided them with the requisite laws and trainings and capacities to know how much to speak, what to stand up for, what not to do. So that's one way communities have actually resisted these false solutions. So talking about ways forward in terms of ensuring that biodiversity protection and climate justice, particularly in the context of land rights, I would say that it is time for those who cause these climate crisis and biodiversity issues to actually take responsibility for addressing it. So to this end, one of the key way forward is for these developed countries, governments to actually take the lead in drastically cutting down emissions at source by pursuing a comprehensive transformation of their energy, their transport, the food, and the economic systems. So to be able to include these steps, we have to have the ending on investment in fossil fuels. We have to have a transforming of our energy system towards community and public renewable energy systems. And we also have to be thinking about abandoning the destructive practices like industrial agriculture and logging. And we also have to be thinking about our community management of biodiversity and water resources, and try to reorganize the urban life to support sustainability. The other thing I think I'll propose would be these neoliberal trade and investment agreements that prioritize the interests of business over environmental sustainability and that of human rights must be revised to allow for these solutions to be rather the right solution than the first ones. And at the same time, these developed country governments must be able to provide large-scale public financing to ensure that they support the much-needed transformation in the developing world. So to have this happen, to succeed, the transition must be just and ensure that the rights of workers, these peasants, women, migrants, and indigenous people, and to also ensure that there will be public community ownership of these creatures. So I'll just stop to this so that others, but I also want to say that the social movements in the global south, our country, Liberia, are already providing some form of models of approach. So if we can look into that, we will see that they will have the planet calming down, right? Where we have agriculture and agro, ecological plants that could feed inhabitants, the nature, the soil, and they'll be able to support forests and safeguard the sea diversity and protect our water basins. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ariatu. Christine, I wanted to turn to you for final reflections and key ways forward. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I wish to provide my final reflection on what we do at the ground to combat the effect of corporate capture and the issues to do with the protected areas, Endorous community being one of them. So what we've done is bring the issue out, we're amplifying at the grassroots. We've been, as an organization that is Endorous Indigenous Women Empowerment Network, we bring out the issues because the community do not understand. Majority of them are illiterate. So as standing at a better comparative position, we will be able to bring the issues and build up a strong network at the grassroots, connecting from the grassroots to international level, just the way we become members of ESCR-Net, so that we collect issues from the local community, and with other partners standing at higher level than us, will be able to bring out the shared analysis of things and share at international platform like UN Permanent Forum on Issues of Indigenous People or any other international events. So what we've done is that become members of different networks happening at the local, at regional, and even at international level. That is what we've done so that our issues don't die. There is a constant fight to injustices that we are facing. We do understand that we face the issues of that we don't have enough resources, but the little we get is we use it to ensure that we have continued way of working. We also provide a lot of document in regards to Endoro's community struggle. I'm very sure if you go to Google, you can see that there is a lot of documents that we put in place that talk about our issues, talk about our struggle, and we've even document or provide a community protocols that is to how do we get into Endoro's and how do we ensure that when you get to Endoro's, there are some specific issues to do so that there is a free, prior, and informed consent. Community do understand what you want to do at the community level. So we've also utilized the international event, blocked days like the World Human Rights Day. So in those spaces, we usually commemorate by mobilizing communities to chant certain song of struggle because we used those days to remind the Kenyan government that we had a very strong community case that was not respected or was not fully implemented in that regards. And us as a community, we want our rights back so that there is no, we don't get burned out over the season. We've also, being a human rights organization, is that we try to promote peace caused by the issues of conflict or climate change, shrinking resources at the community level. So we do understand that even though we take a proactive role, all those we are doing is providing a short-term remedy to a problem. But we look forward to a very long-term kind of support that we can ensure sustainability of our struggle, because we know we are also equally facing a lot of issues coming from COVID-19 session, whereby our borders were locked, and this one comes with a lot of economical challenges in regards to fighting for rights and all that. And now that we are also women right defenders coming from indigenous people, when we try to challenge those spaces, there is a lot of risk that are being transferred to us. So we've been trying to mitigate over and over and build resilience in regards to getting for our community rights. So from my side, that is what we do at the community level and even at the organizational level, trying to build more allies, those people that we share the common issue at hand and see how we can build strength over it, and even try to provide or even speak for our people, those who are vulnerable, those who are more marginalized, and ensure that the struggle is continued at that level. Thank you so much for this space. I want to appreciate Natural Justice African Region, ESCR-Net, for giving us this platform so that we continue airing the challenges that we are facing at the ground, and even connecting this one to different challenges happening across Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you very much for the incredible reflections. Before we move into Q&A, Glory, do you have any final thoughts before we open it up to the audience?
Thank you so much, Joy, for another opportunity. Listening to my other panelists, I think they have touched largely on most of the things. I think I would rather just compliment, and my reflection would be more on anchoring all these discussions on what I think is a principal debate, and is that of the right to land for communities, indigenous people, excluded people. Because environment, climate, and the rest are just associated issues to land, which anchors all of these. And until we have a concrete discussion on what are the modalities of governance, of ownership, of tenure rights of land, then we still give space to these corporate, super powerful states and institutions to continue to dispossess, to continue to evict, and to continue to set set the standards according to their own taste. You see, so thinking about this, I think that, for example, we have precursors to this, to getting towards a discussion on the right to land as a right. We have the tenure guidelines that were adopted sometimes back in 2012. We have the United Nations Rights of Peasants, and which also has some provisions on this, and there are also ongoing debates at different levels. So why am I bringing this? Well, I would not be the best to speak here. I would have loved for collaborators, for example, in Mali to be there, who, for example, extracted or learned from their engagement on these tenure guidelines to negotiate at national level for community tenure rights. You see, and this includes legitimate tenure, so not the neoliberal economic capitalist-based private tenures where you have governments setting up vast areas saying they are vacant areas. We still have countries that have this debate that it's vacant areas, so anything can happen there. And it is on this that the structures of colonization and of oppressions continue to exist, because then the rich and the capitalist-minded say, okay, we're going to live our lives as we choose, and we pay you to plant trees and whatever on these lands at the expense of the community. So I think this discussion on the right to land and core of having communities be at the center of this discussion is something that we need to factor in. How we will do this needs to be maybe further reflected upon. That's one, and also to further support DERM's proposal on movement building, that we build movement at national level, at regional level, but also at global level. So then we are able to engage at the different spaces. For example, I just talked about tenure rights. Tenure rights can be pushed for at national level. This was successful in Mali, and so we can learn from that. But at sub-regional, for example, in the ECOWAS, they are doing something now. The Mali experience is being transferred there. But we can have this, for example, sub-regional level, like in the Southern Africa and the rest, to push for our leaders there to be aware of this and to engage in that, and then maybe at the continental level, and then networking of organizations can go to this. We would need a very strong force from below to challenge this status quo. Otherwise, we would have just greenwashing of things and blue washing of things and co-opting of the language of communities that have been dispossessed, that are suffering oppression. And we have this whole sham of a thing, that tree planting in Africa, and they say we are engaging communities, and simply communities are just co-opted in to plant trees. But these are not fruit trees, and we say there is hunger and the rest. Why aren't they fruit trees planted? In Uganda, for example, now you have this movement of tree plantations, which are eucalyptus. Eucalyptus, for God's sake, consume hell of water, right? And we are planting trees. Why do we plant eucalyptus? Because in the long run, when they are matured, we sell them to make money. So we still build on that capital. It is not about fruit trees. It's not about, so these are just ideas that come through, but I think more thinking would maybe contribute.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Glory. And thanks to all of you, Glory, Radiatu, Christine, and Delme, for these incredibly thought-provoking, urgent, timely interventions that are so inspiring and so needed. So now we very much want to speak to all of you in the audience, and I'm going to hand it over to Catherine to moderate that part of the discussion. Thank you very much all.
Thank you so much, Joey, and thank you so much for those fantastic interventions, really powerful and inspiring and moving. Just encouraging our participants and attendees to please come in. We'd love to hear from you. There's a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Please just post any of your questions or contributions there so we can invite our panelists to join and discuss those further. So please do share some questions. In the meantime, I just wanted to pick up a point, Christine, that you made about land as the umbilical cord between people and nature, and how that umbilical cord has been completely destroyed by a patriarchal, capitalist, colonialist model of and way of being. And we've spoken a lot about the importance of our resistance, and as we beyond resisting and dismantling these root causes and these drivers of oppression, how can we also think about reclaiming and restoring and revalorizing that connection to our land, to the wisdom of indigenous peoples and communities, and revalorizing and reclaiming that traditional knowledge? I just wanted to go back to you, Christine, to help us think through that, and welcome any of the other panelists to come in as well.
Thank you. Should I come in?
Please feel free.
Yes. So thank you for insightful question, and you are making me to think beyond what we are doing now, and then you are making also make us that can you have like indigenous model on how to solve the issues we are going through now. So understanding that being an indigenous person, we have a strong attachment to the land. This is the land even with our fathers, they've shown us how to heal it during an extreme situation. We were told which tree to use it in times of harmony and in times of crisis. So we know how to go about it. And now that we have a different issues at hand, that even those who told us that we are going to do this and this are no more, we have a different dynamic. We have a new situation that is a climate effect. We have flooding, we have animals are dying, our livelihood is nowhere. And then again, we have a unique situation because there is no rain. You know, we are experiencing from our side, this is now the third year without rain. So what we are doing as an organization, as leaders of the community, is that we are trying to embrace a model way of trying to build resilience of the people by building their capacity, telling them about the causes of what we are going through now. Who are these people who has brought these damages to our communities? It is not about rising water level. Somebody else has caused this one in other countries. What are the government policies saying about these site issues? Government has come up with a climate bill, which is not operational at the moment. So as an activist from the community, we are trying to push for those bills to be operational, so that, and again, apart from pushing for those to be operational, we are also building the capacity of the people so that they can have knowledge and skills on how to go about when trying to prioritize their issues at certain level within the development agenda of the government. So here in Kenya, we have something called public participation, whereby community give out their priorities, and you realize that in those public participation, there is minimal participation of women and persons with disabilities. So those are the small nitty-gritties we do at the ground, and then again we provide a short-term remedy like building gabions. You see. Diversifying livelihoods. So we are starting telling our people that it's not only about depending solely on animals for livelihood. Women should start, because we have the issues of we have tourists coming out to Lake Bogoria. How do we tap out of those tourists who are coming to our place, and even trying to share the risk, or like try to solve the issues that the women are going through at their household level. So we've give them chicks to rear them at their household. We've also give them PIPs to do things to like honey processing and all that chain of food production, and even benefiting from that one at the local level. Then at international space, we want to make this thing alive, and we've tried to be a little bit smart, because we are a small community at the ground. A small part of Baringo, that is Lake Boreal landscape, and our issues has been discussed and become a most important thing at international level. And at international level, we don't more often we don't get those spaces to speak about our issues. So we use our allies like ESCR-Net. We use other important network like natural justice, like UN mechanism, because we have mechanism at the UN that speak about indigenous people. We may utilize those spaces at those time, and we share at those spaces about what is going on at the community. We tell them that we have a case, that we really struggle for it. We know that it will bring back our glory, but now that it is 12 years with non-implementation, with the issues of climate change, and we speak about those issues, and then we get a small assistance as we move forward. Like we get support to register ourselves, we get support to build our self-determination and all that, and even to create, to overcome shocks of other issues coming to our communities, like the impact of climate change. So that is what we do. I'm not sure if I have answered it to your expectation, but thank you so much for your question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christine. And you've touched on the importance of using the law and policy reform to safeguard and expand Indigenous people's rights nationally, and of course building and amplifying that at the international level. And like you said, building solidarity across movements and across borders is really critical for our collective struggle. We do have a few questions in the chat. I just want to go back. We have a hand raised by Haruna. Maybe while I ask the questions, I can ask Letu to please give Haruna the mic. And then in the meantime, I have a question from Pauline. And this is a question around the carbon standard plan, which has been used by a number of communities to access financing. This has been used in Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, where the title to land, trees, carbon credits, and all products from land use belong to the communities. I myself am not too familiar with this, but welcome any other panelists to answer this question. And the question is, are there any lessons we can learn from such initiatives? So feel free, Radiatu, Glory, Christine, if you're aware of such initiatives and how we can replicate these.
Maybe I'd say something. I am not aware, I'm not too familiar with these initiatives, so to comment on it without having a full understanding of how they operate, what are the fact that the benefits go to the communities is one thing, but what are these benefits and which other, what is the opportunity cost of this? Because just having the mechanism shared here without an overview of it would be difficult, because then you would ask, okay, yes, because my fear is that this could be a very smart co-opting of the discussions that we say that everything should go back to the communities and the rest, but then it certainly maintains the status quo in that then consumption patterns continue in the West as it is, or in more capitalist. I wouldn't just say the West, but because also in Africa we have these hubs where there are this capitalist model and neo-colonialist patterns that we maintain it this way, but then the communities would get benefits by keeping this. Is this what the community wanted? Does it violate other rights? For example, the rights to food, for example, the rights to their cultural practices and relations with specific nature. For example, what are the trees that are planted? Some communities worship or have relationships with specific trees, but this might not be the same. So there is a plethora of things that we can reflect over, but I don't have detailed knowledge about this, so I cannot really comment in an informed way. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Gloria. Appreciate. We just have another question from Puvan Mudley. And the question is, a key challenge with the false solutions is the focus on how we meet current and future demands based on our consumption levels, especially in continents like North America and Europe. how do we collectively bring the narrative forward that Africa is being stolen again to feed the consumption patterns of others, while in Africa we're dealing with injustice of the impacts of climate change? Feel free to any of our panelists to jump in, maybe Radiatu or Delmi, encouraging you to jump in.
Yeah, Catherine, can you repeat that question? My internet has really gone bad. Yeah.
No worries, Radiatu. It's really a question about about consumption and this capitalist consumption that we've been discussing and dissecting, particularly led and driven and intensified by countries in the global north, North America and Europe. So how do we as Pan-Africanists, how do we collectively bring the narrative forward that not only is Africa being stolen and continues, our land and resources continue to be colonized and commodified, while at the same time we're also dealing with the impacts of climate change and loss and damage. So how do we really demonstrate that ultimately this double bind, this treble bind that the African continent is facing?
Yeah, so I would just say that the first and foremost thing is that the African countries should be provided the kind of space they need to talk about these issues, because, for example, like we have spaces like at the UN and other spaces where we need to have communities representation. Like, because of lack of resources, we don't have African countries fully represented in those spaces, because they are the ones who are facing the brunt on the ground. And like civil society organizations may be represented there, but just like in that very small number that could not fully talk about or address these issues that we are facing on the continent. So the presence of indigenous people, communities, local communities at these spaces where the issues of climate change and biodiversity are discussed, it's important to have a full representation. And to have a full representation, it means that we have to have support that could allow these communities to be in their numbers so that they are able to bring forth their issues. So, for example, I mentioned in my conversation about the issue of Buchanan Renewable, there are liabilities issues that were left on the ground. Like, those issues have not been addressed. There are issues where workers were being harmed. For example, we have this lady who got burned by the plant. She has now this issue. You want to take these people at the forefront of these discussions so that the European Union and others are not able to say, like, okay, so these companies were like bringing these wood chips in our countries, but here's the evidence of what has happened to these people. So that's one key way we can like showcase our issues on the continent, like the spaces. For example, there is COP coming up, because there is this assumption that it is not the African countries who are actually crying out for climate issues that are happening, but it's very clear that Africans are the ones who are actually affected. But how many African countries or representatives do we have in these spaces that are there to be able to showcase or talk about the issues? The other thing is that I see that many a times when we have these spaces, like countries shy away from like signing onto these agreements and like statements that will come up. So, for example, if we consider the legally binding instrument, right, there's this assumption that many African nations are not in support of the legally binding instruments on business and human rights. So what we need to do as African nations is to be able to hold those spaces. When we are in those spaces, let's ensure that when we get back, let's ask our governments to support these civil society organizations, these indigenous communities, so that we sign onto these things. We showcase that these are things that are burning issues for us. And if we must be able to act, it is for us to be able to acknowledge by signing on to those statements, those spaces showcasing our work and talking about those things that are affecting us. Yeah. I don't know what I've answered that, but that's what come off my head.
No, thank you. Thank you, Radiati. That was amazing. Thank you. Absolutely in agreement. Thanks for your power.
Yeah, Kath,
yeah, please go ahead, Dami.
sorry, I just wanted to just to add to what Radiati was saying. I mean, I think, and maybe just to encompass some of the other questions as well, around how we can sort of think about Indigenous people and their role in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and really resisting these false solutions. So, I mean, I think one of the themes that has come through quite clearly in this discussion is that the climate crisis, you know, and all of these other intersecting crises that we face, that the underlying thing is an economic system which is based on you know, short-term profit at the expense of communities, at the expense of the environment, at the expense of the planet. It's a system which demands constant growth. And so whether we're fighting, you know, under the banner of climate change, or, you know, other struggles for socioeconomic justice, really all of us are fighting the same struggle in a sense. And I think that's why building those, you know, that kind of solidarity between these various struggles is so important. But I think one of the issues that we face in our region, in Africa in particular, is around this question of the recognition of Indigenous people's rights. Many of our countries don't even want to use they won't even use the word Indigenous, right? And so what that means is that we don't recognize Indigenous people's land rights. We don't recognize their ways of being, their ways, you know, their modes of production and consumption. And in fact, the way that Indigenous people relate to the land, which is absolutely key, and I think is actually the key, if there is such a thing, to really begin to address these crises, is because I think the way that Indigenous people relate to the land, which is not sort of proprietary, not seeing the land as a commodity, but rather, you know, have a vision of the world in which we belong to the land, we are part of nature. That's a sort of a direct challenge to capitalism, right? It's a direct challenge to this kind of you know, the system that we've all been describing, and so I think, you know, to go to Puvan's question, I think using that word that you used, you know, valorizing Indigenous people's knowledge, valorizing the ways in which Indigenous people, you know, interact with the land, their governance systems, that all of that, it feels to me like that's where some of these answers lie, and really harnessing the wisdom that Indigenous people have, you know, built up over generations and centuries and hundreds, thousands of years at the very least. And there are some practical ways in which that can be done, and the examples of that where Indigenous knowledge is being used in disaster management, for example, in terms of, you know, firefighting and that kind of stuff. But I think there's a broader and maybe more profound work that we need to do in terms of, you know, really kind of amplifying the voices of Indigenous people, but also their knowledge and really kind of building a critique of this kind of capitalist system that we live under, which is based on indigenous knowledge, indigenous wisdom, indigenous governance systems, and just thinking differently about the way that we relate to the world, thinking differently about how much we need to consume, right? Because one of the problems with the system is that it operates to the benefit of the few, right, and not the many. Whereas that's really what we want to flip on its head. We want a system that actually operates for the majority of people, and not for a small elite group of people. And so, yeah, I think indigenous peoples and systems really are key to that struggle, and I think that's sort of where we really need to really talk a lot more about that, and sort of amplify those voices, because I think that is critical to challenging the system.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Delmi. Sorry, feel free.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to what Delmi has just shared, is that from my own perspective is that Africa has never healed from colonialization that was done before. Whatever we are talking now is rooted back to when Africa was scrambled, its resources were scrambled for, and part of Africa was partitioned and introduced a different language that we could not understand one another. And I think we still continue with the same suffering now, because most African states inherit a system and policies that at the end of the day, the colonialism put in place system that could benefit him. But at the same time, African state did not realize that whatever system they inherited from colonialists are the same system that resulted into resources going to the state and leaving communities that had these resources to become more poorer than before. At the community level, the value of any resource is at zero. So when this resource moves on to the next person, it benefits the other person more than the communities that has it. Let me give you an example. In Lake Bogoria, we have enzyme. This enzyme is the best enzyme in this world. We are being told that. And these are the resources that we cannot see using our eyes. And these are resources that we've been protecting for that long time. The Ghanaian government give out license to Leicester University. I understand it is in London. This Leicester came just like any other tourist, get into our lake, collect water, and they took this water and do a lab test. And that is how we lost these ecological resources. When this person, I understand he made a lot of money out of this one. And then again, this money, it was taken for profits, and that profit benefit the other side. When you come to the same Bogoria now, the community is battling the effects of climate change. The community is living in actual poverty. The community has lost their self-determination. We've even going through a lot of issues like extinction and all that because of assimilation and all that. And this problem is because because when we talk about false solution, the way this system was introduced to us was to cure certain issues, or to like give us a better management, give us better hospitals, give us all those could promises being given to us by the government. Let me give you another example. The tourism action in Lake Bogoria was supposed to cut 10% of the all collection from the lake, just for our own development and that. But out of reality is that this 10% is not benefiting our people. It is going through the government officers that are in Lake Bogoria. So what I'm trying to bring in is that because the government, our African state was captured. It was captured by colonialists. We've never healed. There is a false solution that we are independent, while is in the real reality is that we are experiencing neo-colonization. There are other that world countries that are colonizing us. They are imposing a lot of debts into our countries. They are the Ghanaian government. The government is giving our land, to the outside world to develop us, thinking that this development, that these people are coming to our land will give us a better advantages, comparative advantages. They will come in with good roads. It will come in with good hospital, with good school. But it will the false is that this comes in with a lot of issues. We are using a colonial system. We are being captured in a way, in how we relate in our systems, and even so. You would want to a solution is go back. Let's have a systems whereby it is people oriented, because I'm very sure all this is top down. We want down up approach to issues whereby it is people oriented. It's a problem solving and all that kind of issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. I really appreciate that intervention. It's difficult to add on to that. Just the reference to the continued colonialization, the neo-colonialism, and the scaffolding of colonialism, which is on which our continent rests, and that needs to be fully dismantled. So thank you so much, Christine. I see we've got folks who would like to speak, and we've had questions in the Q&A. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry, these conversations are so in depth, and it's difficult to solve these or discuss and dissect these amazing questions and have these dialogues in such a short time. But unfortunately, we have run out of time. But just to acknowledge the questions from those who put them in the chat, Cyrus, someone under the name of ADF, and Valentine. In many ways, your questions have been answered in this session. When we talk about land back, when we talk about land sovereignty and land redistribution, the importance of protecting communities' lands and respecting indigenous communities. And of course, the question of debt and reparations, not just climate reparations, but much broader reparations to the continent from the global north, those that have created this crisis, those that have colonized and continue to occupy and recolonize our lands, and to continue to cut the umbilical cord between people and nature. So thank you for those questions. We indeed need debt-free and conditionality-free reparations. So just to acknowledge your questions and to say thank you so much for sharing those. But we have run out of time. I'd like to go straight to a wrap up, and I just want to acknowledge that Lech Borsi Saro Payagbara, the leader of the Movement for Survival of Ngoni people, is present here, and thank you so much for taking the time to join this conversation, and power and solidarity to you. So thank you. I just wanted to, of course, say one final thank you to our speakers. It's been absolutely incredible listening to you and hearing from you, and we will hold all of this in our minds and our hearts. So thank you. I'd like to thank our co-conveners, ESCR-Net, the African Civil Society Biodiversity Alliance. Very special thank you to Joy and Basma from ESCR-Net for all the labor you've put into this. And thank you to Site Translation, Eric and his team, and to Structivate Impact for all of the support you've given us today with this conferencing. And then finally, again, a thank you to the African Climate Justice Collective and the convener of this African People's Counter COP, and really for creating this global space, global South and Pan-African space to help us, build power and solidarity from below. As Christina said, we need that power from below. So thank you very much. To those who are following the COP CBD in December, we hope to be hosting a similar session. So please do look out for it. And just one last shout of solidarity to the feminists who are gathering in Namibia, who have come across from all over the continent to join the feminist COP. So we send our solidarity. And just one last thank you. And as we say in South Africa, amandla wethu, power to the people. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.